Hey, welcome to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard. Since I was a kid, I was told my conversations were way too deep. Well, now it's paying off. Join me and the names you know as we go deep into their personal stories of triumph, tragedy, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Friends, this crazy, overwhelming life we live calls for some serious encouragement and inspiration. So grab a cup of coffee and get your notebook because we're going into the classroom of life. So let's get lifted with faith-filled conversations. I'll see you on the path.
Watch in Canada on Yes TV and the Yes TV app, or watch on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Pioneer Network, Faith TV, and more in the US. Also watch and subscribe on our YouTube channel.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On the Path. I am so excited. As I always say, guys, we are in the classroom of life, and I love every single guest we've had so far. We are learning incredible lessons from their books, from their lives, from their ups, their downs, their mountains, their valleys, from all the things in between. And when I tell you we have a teacher of teachers in the building, I am so excited. I love when I get to connect with this incredible powerhouse. I'm honored to say that she's a legitimate friend of mine. If you don't know this name, just give me 30 minutes. I guarantee you will be a follower, an appreciator, a student for life. I cannot wait to tell you about Jo Saxton. Jo Saxton is an executive director for the 25 at Bethel University. She's a leadership coach, and she's the founder of a powerhouse group called Ezer Collective, a fierce tribe of forefront women leaders. She's a best-selling author and speaker who's passionate about empowering women to lead confidently. Her books, like The Dream of You and Ready to Rise and many others, focus on identity, resilience, and leadership. And as co-host of the Lead Stories podcast, Jo explores leadership, purpose, and faith. She's a sought-after speaker. She draws from her rich experience in ministry and not-for-profits, and she inspires people wherever she goes. And she's one of the most realist of the real. Would you welcome my dear friend, Jo Saxton?
Yay! Thank you for having me. Woohoo!
Jo Saxton, I am so excited to have you in the building. It has been too long.
Has.
I think it really has. You came on in the early stages, and we got new furniture. Got a couple of things going on.
Leveled up a little bit. It's a little exotic. Okay.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jo, I see you. We all see you. You're doing incredible things in the kingdom of God. I cannot wait to ask you these questions. And these questions actually were not just shaped by me, but some people that really love you. So I'm so excited to ask them. But here's my first one. Jo Saxton, if your life, this is a beautiful way for us to get to know you a little deeper. If your life was a movie, what would the title be and why?
It would be something like either You Wouldn't Believe It or I Told You So. You wouldn't believe it because so many things don't quite make sense. And in many ways, I don't look like where I've been. So that would be part of it. I think the I Told You So would probably be the latter part, or maybe the sequel, of where I was probably ranting about something and decided to get on and do it. And that would be the other. So depending on whether you want the don't look like where you've been or whether you want the she just kind of got on and did it, those would be the titles.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to find out more about that. You are such a leader of leaders, and you actually spend a lot of your time developing leaders, equipping them and training them, and you're constantly imagining a better future for women leaders in particular everywhere. I just wonder, as we kind of start this journey on the path, as we walk and talk, can you paint us a picture of when you see a better future? What does that look like? When you see that for women leaders?
When I see a better future, I see humanity living into the fullness of their gifting for human flourishing. And that means that they are celebrated and not tolerated, not merely tolerated and tokenized. and that we are celebrating different leadership styles, different ways of doing things, that the pathways and there's not like one set model, one set dynamic, and this is what makes a good leader, but it recognizes different gifting, different personality types, different cultures ways of showing up as leaders, and it invests and celebrates it. Also, the women are paid equitably. That also happens in my wonderful world. Women are paid equitably, and that they don't feel like they have to accept less and fear being seen as too much or not enough. But I think when I think of the picture of leadership, I feel like strategically it is everybody stepping into what they're about, and being able to make their contribution. I think that's the thing I'm most kind of preoccupied with and obsessed with. Like, make sure we're making a way so that everybody can make their contribution, because then you see the most creative things, the most dynamic organizations, the healthiest, when we are receiving all that God has placed in humanity to accomplish his work and his call.
And what would you say would be like one of the biggest key steps in order to even get to that place?
I think we do have to examine our relationship with power. I think power is incredibly seductive. And I think sometimes, and I don't know about you, Cheryl, but I know for me growing up, when we'd have these talks about money, sex, and power, they emphasized the money and the sex and didn't really talk about the power, when actually all of the conversations were really about power, and whichever angle they were going through. And I think if we are going to, I feel like certain things are held tightly, and we have spiritualized why they're held tightly. We have made theologies around why we've held things tightly, and some. Don't get me wrong. I know there's a continuum of ideas, and I'm not ignoring that. But we have spiritualized why people are underpaid. We have spiritualized why it's okay to burn out a leader. We have and we have spiritualized why we haven't called people to accountability, and we haven't instituted healthy accountability for all. And so I think one of the things is, can we surrender power and allow the Lord to lead us again? Or do we feel we need power to achieve his ends? And do we need to express power on our terms in accordance with our comfort zone, in our way, to achieve his ends? And I think at least beginning to look at and stand back and say, where have I co-opted values that actually don't reflect who I say I believe in? Because and don't get me wrong, power's not always wielded with a big mighty fist. Sometimes it's in the not delegating, not inviting somebody else, not welcoming another idea. Sometimes it's incredibly polite. Sometimes it's in who we choose to overlook and don't even consider for an opportunity, because it's easier if it's just us. It's quicker if it's us, or we are more drawn or attracted to people whose power that we are almost a bit seduced by. And so I don't know that even when I talk about power, it necessarily shows up in some kind of fist slamming on the table. It's just who gets to hold things and whether we share it.
Wow. And this struggle for power, how do we even begin to unravel this? I know we can't actually find a solution right now, but if someone is listening and they have a seat at the table in some way, what are the questions or what are the challenges that they should be offering up to help us begin to loosen this grip on power?
I think I like to encourage us to think of a couple of things. Jesus was the best leader. We believe, if we're coming at this from a faith perspective, that Jesus was the best leader that there ever was. He wasn't just the best at doing things. He was the best leader that has ever walked across the earth. How did he do it? And what we see in his example is that he invested in, he was not owned by the power of the day. He did not need political power. He did not need credibility in people's eyes. He knew his power source, and he kept on engaging with that. We see, and in that, even though he had a precious work to do and an important work to do, he still entrusted that to people who weren't fit to do it, and weren't the most popular people to do it, and not the obvious choices. And whether that's the disciples or Susanna, Joanna, and Mary, and the other women who traveled with him, even then, we see him sending out 12 and sending out 72 to go ahead of him. We see him reckoning with their failures and restoring them to task. And we see him getting out of the way and leaving it to them. And I guess I just want to ask us, as we lead, are we divesting? Are we, could anybody surpass us? Could anybody, are we investing in anybody enough to the degree, not so that they're almost as good as we are, but so that they could take the work on from us? And that's an active, it might take years, but whenever you start is when the work begins, you know? And I think for certain public facing roles, I think it's hard to even imagine what that could look like, but I think we need to. I think, so that's a practical thing. Who are we investing in? Who are we offering opportunities to? And what does that look like in our context? It'll look different for different people in different ways. But what does it look like to create opportunity and pathways to opportunity in your context? Because I think we see that in the life and leadership of Jesus.
That's so good. And you know, Jo, you've graced some of the largest platforms inside and outside of the Big C Church, global stages. I wonder, what is your greatest hope for her, the Big C Church, and what's your biggest frustration right now?
I think the power thing is a frustration. I think we could do with listening, and we could do with listening to the voices that we don't often hear. Like it's always a privilege to speak in these spaces, but it doesn't need to be me. There are plenty of others. It would be interesting to see voices from other cultures, not the West to the rest, but what the global South would say and speak into our lives. I think there's something to be heard about that and said about that. So my hope would be that we'd hear, because I think we'd get a fuller picture of faith. We'd get a fuller picture of our humanity. We would see our blind spots because someone was showing us the way. We'd know maybe the things we've overemphasized or underemphasized, because we weren't supposed to see everything in one person,
right?
And in one country. That doesn't make sense. And I think we'd remember that wealth and the wealthiest doesn't mean the best or the most blessed. And I think sometimes we still have a little angle that the biggest means best, and that therefore also means most anointed. And it's not true. It's just not, it's not true. There's no biblical evidence for that kind of stuff. And yet somehow we do that. So I hope we would listen and seek out the voices. And for those of us who have privilege and power, that we would look at how we leverage that.
Oh my goodness, that's so good. And I feel like that is a beautiful jump off point of almost part of the why of Ezer Collective. Tell us a little bit about Ezer Collective and kind of what was that driving, that force that made you give birth to that?
You know, like sometimes you get a dream or something because you have a passion for something. I think, and sometimes you have it because you're annoyed. And I think I was annoyed. I was at lots of events speaking. I was working with a ministry that talked about how they did discipleship and mission. And I was often the only woman in the room on the consulting side. And then I'd meet women at events and conferences and stuff, and they'd ask about their journey. And in some ways, Cheryl, I was kind of naive about certain things. I'd been operating in my own bubble a little bit. And so I wasn't as aware of some of the obstacles. I mean, don't get me wrong, I knew there were obstacles. I just wasn't as aware of some of those things. And I used to talk to the guys on my team and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. We need to do something about it. And they do, and they would have a very idyllic response. Which was like, you know, it'd be great if there was a day when we didn't need to have a woman's thing. And I'm like, okay, but that's not, back here on planet Earth, there are things to be done. And I think there was a point when I realized I talked to about so many people that I needed to ask the Lord whether he was asking me to make my contribution in some way. And I'd been coaching a number of women for a while, and so then I think I just began to imagine what would it look like. I thought, you know what, you don't need to tell women what to do. You do need to give them a space though, where they can, and I thought, what kind of space would I want to be in? And I'd want to be in a space where I'd unapologetically be able to be myself, where it was deliberately about leadership, that it wasn't almost about leadership. It wasn't kind of sneakily talking about leadership or anything, although I get all of those things. But if I had the chance to design a space, they would know they were leaders. They would be women who were, that it would be for women And it would be for women because they would, not because I was trying to do a women's thing, but because they needed a space where they could say what they need to say, they can get back out and do their work. And I didn't want any conversation to be off the table. I wanted it to have women who were in ministry and women who were in the workplace, because often they don't get together enough. And I feel like there's some synergy there that can catalyze things. And I knew if you could put those women in a space just to get on with it, that there would be creative things birthed out of it. And so I think that was the idea behind this. Like I'd seen that conversation, those things happen one-on-one in a small group. What would it look like if we could make it a little bit bigger and make it a training space? And also because, like you, so tired of people saying, yeah, I'd love to have more women involved, but where are they? And recognizing that I would be in these spaces training men and the women not be in the room. So again, you'll continually invest. And don't get me wrong, great men. It wasn't about the guys. It was, how do you effectively do what you're called to do as churches, as community, as nonprofits, as businesses, when only half of you are being equipped to do so? And you can't, and so on one level, I could see why they were saying, whether I felt it was justified or not, I could see why they were saying, well, the women aren't ready. Like, no, they aren't, but then there's also no investment happening. So I'm like, okay, why don't we do something where we train and invest? And the other thing I was seeing, Cheryl, is women who were so sick and tired that they were sabotaging by this point because they were so bitter, so disillusioned, so hurt. And then they were like, you know, I'll give it all the finger and move away from it all because they're done. And I'm like, can we catch you before that happens? And can we sit you down and say, leave the place before it leaves you bereft? Oh. You know, before it leaves you burned, before it leaves you damaged? Or can we have a place where we can say, that loyalty that you're doing to that person, they ain't that into you. They ain't that into you. And I do mean the church you're working for. And that's why they keep on asking you to train all the male preachers, and then you never get an open door, because they're not that into you. And you're having a conversation hoping one day it's going to change, but the diminishing returns are you're not going to get an opportunity. Or for the women who were in business who were like, the church, how did one of my friends put it? The church knows what to do with my money. It doesn't know what to do with me. Wow. And she's a CEO. And it's like, these women are on the front line in tech, in hospitals, in schools, in business, in marketing, in finance. And what we're saying is that we're all okay with not investing in their leadership. We're good with that. No. We're good with not sitting down and ministering. We're good with not talking about strategic things. What are we doing? And so it felt like, it's like, well, maybe they're not seen, but I see them. And so if I see them, then my next question is, Lord, what do I do about what I see? And Ezer came out of that.
And what makes you most proud now as you look at the journey of Ezer Collective? What just makes your heart go, yes?
I love hearing of the things that women are doing themselves, like women who've gone and done events of their own in other parts of the country. Because there was one point where we were like, are we supposed to kind of make it happen everywhere? And that, which is don't get me wrong, that felt like a natural thing, but I felt like the Lord said to me, he goes, no, that's not what I'm asking you to do. That is a natural thing to do, but it's not what I've asked you to do. If you're catalyzing these leaders, let them go and do what they're about. And it was fun. Sometimes you don't know the fruit of something until you scatter the seed and you see these things pop up. Yeah. So I think I'm proudest of seeing I always love hearing about the women who renegotiated their pay, because that's bills. We can guarantee that the sun will rise and the bills will come. And so I'm pleased, because that changes their life. That means that they get to go on vacation with their spouse. They can pay for their kid through college. They get to look after an aging parent. So I'm proud of that kind of stuff. And I'm proud of seeing women who once thought that they were an afterthought in the eyes of God and the eyes of their context to come back and either discover that context wasn't good for them, or that context is ready to support them and help them launch something. So yeah, those things have been really exciting to see.
And it's exciting to watch, let me say. As someone who's, heavily involved in leadership, I know that there's been seasons that you felt super overwhelmed and super isolated. And for those that are listening that are in spaces of leadership, what are some of the postures, some of the rhythms, some of the practices that you have personally that keep you nourished and sustained and grounded as you do this big work?
I like the way you say postures and rhythms, because I think that is so true. I don't know that I have a blueprint, but there are, like, I tell you, one of the things and I always do this on Instagram. I go to the gym and I do all these crazy classes that I'm terrible at, but I love. And one of the things that they've taught me, other than how much I need to work on my upper body strength, is that is they give you different exercises every time. You never get used to it because it keeps on training you. And I think having different postures and rhythms is a good thing, but so that you don't get kind of blasé. So in this season of my life, having times of silence has been really powerful for me. Really powerful. And I'm not even sure I always know why. I just felt this year, I felt a lot of pressure, a lot of overwhelm, and I just needed to come before God and be, and to be silent. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't, I mean, hello, perimenopause, but, and anxiety and everything. And I just needed to have a moment of being still and sitting, and I couldn't, I'm not going to say that those times of sitting still were times of great revelation. But they kind of were and weren't. They weren't at the time, but I noticed my days were different. And I'm like, I'm just going to do that again. I don't know what that was. I don't have to understand it. I just have to like the benefits. So I think that's been one. I have a prayer partner and we pray 3 mornings a week. That has been just the irrigation of my life. I think I remember, as we might have been one of the last times I saw you, actually, coming out of the pandemic and stuff, and realizing the kinds of prayer life we had in 2019 was not going to sustain us now. The kind of devotional life and postures was not going to sustain us.
Yes.
Like, it's like that, there ain't enough nutrients in it. I don't know how to put, and I can't even say I know why. I just know it to be true. There ain't enough nutrients. Life is like, leadership is too complex. There are too many things going on inside of us and outside of us to not have it together. And it's very easy to not be together on this stuff. And so I think it's made me realize I have to keep close attention. Like, even yesterday I woke up and I just thought, God, I think I need a reset. And I think I'm allowing myself permission to say, you know what? Whatever you do today, clear out some stuff. This week's got to be different. You need to press into prayer more. You need to read the word. I've been reading the history books of the Bible this year, and oh my gosh, it's so depressing. And I'm like, Lord, can sometimes I'm like, I just need a psalm for a minute. I just need a gospel or something before I go back in and find about another king that didn't tear down high places. I think other rhythms are rhythms of movement and accountability, like friends. Who am I talking to? And do they know my stuff? I mean, I have a therapist anyway, so that is a key part of my life. But going for a walk with good friends is a key part of my life. Making sure I'm having fun. Like the gym is a key part of my life. It helps. I don't again know the full correlation, and it certainly hasn't given me abs, but it is a mental trash can. And it just, I've got to stay well. I've got to keep attending to that. And those rhythms, those things have really helped me. And I think there is something about being in a place where you don't have it together. I think maybe that's one of the things the gym has done for me. I am the slowest at all the things, and it's good. It's good that it's good to be in places where you're not winning. It's good to be in places where you're learning. I'm back working with young adult students who are lovely. I mean, I adore them. But again, I look at it and it's a different world. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to learn stuff all over again. I just do. There's stuff I know and there's stuff they know. And now I'm having to learn their language to be able to serve them well and learn their world. And I'm a long way from their world. But it's good. It's good to... That's what it requires. Yeah. It's not like any of us, those of us who had kids, whether it was through physical, whether we gave birth to it or whether we adopted or fostered, none of us knew what we were doing. None of us.
That's right.
We just had to, but we knew we wanted the outcome. Yeah. So we did the journey. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But none of us knew it. And I think in the same way, I think in this chapter of my life, in this moment, the posture of learning and humbling myself or allowing myself to be humbled so I can keep learning has been really, really good for me.
I got a word for you. I'll just say it and let it sit for a second, but
Mm,
I'm setting this question kind of against the backdrop of your book, Ready to Rise, which I love.
hmm
When I say the word resilience,
hmm
what does that mean to you? And why is it critical to have spiritual resilience for the next
hmm
level?
Um, it's funny when you say resilience, and I think about grit and how grit can be grown. Um, I think it's uh, I I think sometimes we forget how desperate things are.
Mm,
I think sometimes we forget how, and I want to encourage us, like to maybe take a walk in a neighborhood, either figuratively or literally, in a space where they do not have what you have. Watch the news. I know sometimes we don't want to watch the news. Open your eyes and watch the news because it's happening. It's happening. Or be aware of what's. I was listening to something here a while back where a senator was saying about how there is no food insecurity here, and it was just some foolish. I'm just going to call it foolish because it's also not true. And I'm like, I'm on the board of a non-profit that fights food insecurity. People ain't eating, sir. People are not eating. Kids are and kids are hungry, and they can't learn when they're hungry. And I think the reason why we need this resilience is because we have been charged and invited to join God in the renewal of all things.
mm,
And that is not just a party. That is a long obedience in the same direction, as Eugene Peterson used to write. He was talking in the context of discipleship. But actually, yes, as disciples, as followers in his footsteps, part of our journey will be struggle and suffering and waiting and boredom and mundane and disappointment and dealing with the systemic realities that we face. That sometimes everything parts like the Red Sea, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, honestly, it doesn't, or sometimes it does eventually. Or the reason why there's a break in the wall that releases the dam is because you've been tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping and for and and praying and fasting and praying and then getting tired and then getting up again and doing the same thing. But supposing that's 20 years, supposing that's 30 years, supposing it's for our children's children. Are we, maybe some of the prayers are for a time not yet seen. And I think we have to remember that this is not microwave Christianity. And I would love it to be real talk. I would love it. I am not a fan of patience in any way whatsoever. It's really dull. And I do not feel holy in it. But I think we have to reckon with those realities. And I think to stop us from getting disillusioned, but not just disillusioned. I mean, Cheryl, I'm sure you would acknowledge too, the times when we just got distracted.
yes.
Just got distracted, caught up in the stuff of things in the end that mattered, but they didn't matter. I don't want to waste time. I tell you, one of the things I'm hearing a lot at the minute, and I'm sure it's because I'm 50 and I turned 50 this year, and a number of my friends, I've heard a number of women say, I'd have handled that. I could have maybe tolerated that in my 30s, but not at 50. And it's almost this sense of like, you know what? I'm done. I don't have time for this mess. And I think the need for the resilience is a sense of, we don't have time for this mess. We have got to get it together and prepare for the reality that this is not a sprint. It is an ultra marathon. And as such, it's going to require some fitness and some hydration and really good shoes. And we got to go. Do you know what I mean? I think that for me is the thing. I hate what I've seen in terms of leaders falling. And I don't want to pretend that couldn't be me.
Yeah.
But I don't want to pretend that the distractions that have distracted me in the past won't distract me again, or that disillusionment won't embed itself in my soul again. And I think it's for all of those reasons that I think paying attention to that is important.
Jo, I'm just such a fan of all the written stuff that you're just. It's rare to find someone who speaks as well as they write and writes as well as they speak.
You're very kind.
Yeah, no, for real. And your book, The Dream of You speak specifically about reclaiming identity. I'd love to kind of like just sit with that for a second. How
Mm.
did your personal journey shape the book? And what do you find is resonating with readers when they sort of bring back that feedback?
It's so surreal that because I was actually thinking of leadership when I wrote it, and I realized I wanted to write a leadership book, but I realized as I was speaking to women and at events that the identity piece was the thing that held people back. And so I knew I had to revisit. And I think for me, I realized and for many of us, it's layers. In each chapter, there's a thing. Like each chapter of our lives, I mean. It's like what we encountered as children, what we encountered as teens, as we enter young adulthood. And that they're like the layers of an onion. And so I think I find what has been amazing and humbling is people have found themselves in different parts of the story. The time when they lost their voice, the time when they found it hard to connect with God as Father, the time when they were in the valley, the time when they knew devastating loss. And I think it just reminded me that even in the gift of a long life, there are just many moments and many. I used to think that the identity thing was get it nailed when you're a teenager and you won't have to worry later. Yeah, you will, because life keeps on lifing. And I think what has been encouraging is seeing people recognize that their story isn't done.
Oh, so good. And for the people who are struggling right now in the places and spaces of leadership that they're in, what would be something key that you think would help recalibrate them, almost sort of, get them back right-sided?
I think if you are wrestling with the leadership space, the first thing I want to ask you to do is take a walk,
Mm.
a long walk. I think it's real hard I think so, and I think it can feel real pressure to reignite. Do you know what I mean? It's like the lights gone out, light the fire again. And it's not that I don't want all of that, but there's a reason why you got where you are.
Mm.
There's a reason. And I feel like you might need a minute to work that out and to unpack that. So I want to invite you on a walk, a long walk with God. And maybe the next day you do it again and again and again. And you might want to make that a walk where you don't mind ranting and raging because ain't nobody going to interrupt you. Or if you're weeping, you might want to wear your glasses even though it's nighttime. Wear your shades. I have like big wraparound shades. Ain't nobody seeing what's happening because you need to. But I want you to get some fresh air and some daylight. Now for some of us, we might need a conversation partner.
Yeah.
I basically and I say both of those things, one which is probably a bit more introverted and one that's a bit more extroverted, because whatever is inside that's stirring, we need to pull out and look at.
Yes.
We need to pull out and look at before we do another thing, because otherwise you misdiagnose what's going on and you try and fix it. It's like, oh, I'm burnt out, I'll have a day off, and then you wonder why you're still exhausted and you still hate people. Well, because other stuff was going on, and you got deep wounds and you're putting little band-aids on and wondering why it's not changed anything. It's like, well, because it's a whole caving wound. Do you know what I mean? It's this whole, and you're going back and you keep on pouring the same toxic stuff on you and wondering why it still hurts. It's like, well, yeah, you need time to see what's going on.
Oh, so good. And while we're here, it's not in my notes, but I've got to ask you because you brought it up, and I know that this is a question that's constantly asked. How did you? I'll ask it in a personal question. How did you recognize that you were in a season of burnout? What was it that flagged for you?
Oh gosh. Well, I like to do things spectacularly, so I would say there are two. I'm going to identify two. Well, it was one time, I was waking up in the middle of the night 3 or 4 times a night with anxiety attacks.
Oh.
There had been a crisis at church that had resulted in us leaving. So it was really clear, end of myself. That one was a bit more, that was easier to identify. I was, I woke up, I was tired, I was exhausted, I was spent, I wasn't sleeping, and that lasted for like 7 months or something. Wow, so I was like holding my eyeballs out by the end of it. Wow. And striving and wrestling and grieving and just so many things all at once. But I tell you, just before I took a sabbatical last year, I think that was a different kind of thing where I was beyond jaded. beyond jaded, and I didn't recognize it was a kind of burnout at first, because I'm pretty okay at taking days off and things like that. I've learned over the years, because of those times when you wake up more tired than you were when you went to bed. I can sniff the beginnings of the flames of burnout. You know what I mean? I'm like, there's something there. But that one was sobering because I was so jaded, and I could hear myself be disillusioned about prayer, be disillusioned about people, to say I was just negative and wearily negative. And I just was just so done. And I'd hear things, I was like burned on the stuff of ministry and leadership. I was out. I was over it. I was like, one wound or one story would hit another story, would hit another story. Wow. My story is someone else's story, and I'd be like, well, of course somebody else abused their power, because that's what they do. And, do you know what I mean? It was just so, it was like this, it wasn't even a grinding halt, it was just slowing down. I'm just like, God, I cannot with this. I cannot. I have no vision for the kingdom, because I'm sick of people who mess this up. And I'm not even saying I'm any better. I just don't even want to be part of this anymore. Yeah. And I think that one is like, perhaps you need a break. Do you know what I mean? Because perhaps you're at the end of things. And I think here's the underbelly of when you're really resilient as a person. Yeah. And when you have done things because it's necessary. And immigrant people, I'm looking at you. Do you know what I mean? And working class brothers and sisters, I'm looking at you. And I'm not saying it's not true of everybody, because it is, but I'm looking at you guys particularly because you don't even always know how resilient you are, because in that language, you're not doing it to hold on, you're doing your base necessary. And the problem with that is it goes on so long, you don't always realize how burnt out you are. And you tolerate so much because you've never had a choice. You've never had a choice. I had one of my kids, one of my girls at Bethel has paid her way through college. And I said to her, I goes, please celebrate what you've done, because you need to know how remarkable you are. That you get up early in the morning, you go to work, and then you go to classes, because you're the first person in your family who's done this. Do you know what I mean? And I said, and it came at great cost to you. And she looked at me and she just said, thank you. And I go, it came, but do you see what I mean? That's what I mean. When we have been people who've done that for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we may not even realize how burnt out we are.
Wow. Goodness gracious. So the follow-up question must be asked. How do we pull ourselves out? Or if you'd like to share, how did you pull yourself out? How do we begin that first step out of burnout? Goodness.
I mean, I remember a friend of mine who I knew from Rwanda who talked about saying you can't heal what you don't name. And so some things are, what do we need to name? What do you need to name about where you're at, how you feel about your relationships, how you feel about your job, how you feel about your body, what's your body trying to name? You know what I mean? What's your body trying to name? It's like alarm, alarm, alarm. What's it saying? And are you even listening? I think that's our starting point. And I think for me, that was my starting point. I remember some of my friends, I was talking to some of my like long-time history friends from my college days. And one of them called me the next day and she said, something's not right with you. And so she called the others up and said, like, they did a Zoom call because obviously they're all in the UK, and they all just said, yeah, this isn't good. This is like, we see you. And you know, these are the girls who've known me since I was 20, 21, 20, 22. And like, we see you, and we need you to look after yourself and to look up, like, this is, and it wasn't even an intervention. It was a kind of, no, it's not like they were challenging me. They were like surrounding me and saying, okay, we got you. And we're going to talk to you, and we're going to tell you what you need and what you need. And we're going to pray, and we're going to listen to the Lord. And none of us are getting off this call until the Lord has given us a word, tell you what's needed. And one of them had this picture of internal bleeding. And she said, you know, you get up again and again and again, and the visible bruises are healed, but the internal ones have not been healed. And I think, again, it was the naming, because when you can't name it yourself, sometimes you need someone to name it to validate what you're feeling. Because otherwise you're just like, oh, I just need to get over it. Oh, I just need to repent. Oh, I just need to, and all of that kind of stuff. And God's like, actually, I'd like to get you better. And so that was, and then it was like, and what's the plan? And what's the plan? And for me, I had to stop. And that has looked different, like different things in different times of my life. That has, but I suspect with the burnout thing, there's got to be a no somewhere. It's got to be a no, because otherwise we keep on doing it. We keep on living it. And I don't know. I know there are times when we do feel powerless, but sometimes it's the consequences of the decisions that we do have the power to make that make us feel powerless, not the actual doing it ourselves. And I really wrestled with the idea of a sabbatical, because I think of my elders and my immigrant elders, and I'm like, they didn't get sabbaticals.
Right.
They didn't get sabbaticals. My aunts didn't get sabbaticals. They tolerate all kinds of craziness. And so to the point, Cheryl, I called my sister before I even decided to take it. I said to her, I go, sis, I feel I need a sabbatical, but I feel really privileged. And it feels like, who do I think I am that I get to do this and everything? And she's like, okay, first of all, if you need a rest, you need a rest.
Yes.
And also, you can't be judging what our elders did or what maybe they didn't get a chance to. And she goes, and you don't know what rest for them looked like or what they needed. And they didn't go through all of that for you not to take one. You know what I mean? Didn't work that hard. They didn't work that hard, go through that much for you to say, I know, I got to be burnt out like you were. And so she's like, I think that it's a false economy doing that. That's not making sense. So if you need a break, you take a break because you can. And take the break that you can because you can. And don't decide that you need to stay exhausted and wounded because others can't. Take the break. Take the break. If that's what he's given you, take what he's given you. And it went from there.
Wow. Can I just say this for those that are listening? It's very rare for me to do this, but can I encourage you to share this episode with a friend? I already know that I'm going to entitle it Leadership and Burnout. And I feel like every single person who is working the fields of ministry and business and all the things, we need the tools, we need the help, we need to be able to see it from a distance, to call it before it really becomes something serious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, because we're not okay. It's okay to say we're not okay.
That part.
And that we are not fully recovered because how do you recover from whatever the 2020s have been about thus far? How are you recovered? Do you know what I mean? And for some of us, we so gritted our teeth and carried on that actually the grief of it is only just hitting 3-4 years in now. And you're like, I should be past this by now. Of course you shouldn't be past. The world shut down, and it shut down your business, and it shut down your marriage, and it shut down your family, and you didn't know where to go, and everybody was scared. Of course we're not going to be past this by now. And it's okay to name that. And I know that people are going back into the office and all that kind of stuff, and I get all of that. But whatever's on the inside, in the office of your soul, as it were, needs attention. It needs attention. We all need that. That's a we thing. That's not a you. That's a we thing. We need it.
Yeah. Jo Saxton, you are such a light. I know that you're not comfortable around compliments. She is so grounded. Literally, she starts to cringe and her body gets tight.
Yep.
She doesn't love the flattery, but I have to say you are a voice just crying in the wilderness for so many. The tools you've given us, the insight, the depth. I want to ask you a very personal question as we close. As someone who's already shared so openly about coming out of burnout seasons, when you were at those rock bottom moments of your life, I always ask this question of every guest, like I always say storms are our greatest teachers. It's what we learn in the rock bottom moments that adds value, thickens skin, gives us deeper insight. What did you learn, Jo, at the lowest point of your life about about God, about Jo Saxton, and about community? What were those big lessons that came up?
I think what I've learned about God in those times is that he loves me and that he's there. And I think there are these moments when, in those times where I am literally like, Daddy, would you just come and get me, please? Do you know what I mean? I feel like the kid who is just reaching her arms up and I just need you to pick me up because I can't. Do you know what I mean? I've grazed my leg. I'm hurting. I'm bleeding. I have no answers. And I just need you. I don't know how to say it anyway. There aren't the words. I just need you. And what I have found and learned about God is that he is right there. He's right there. He's already there. I was saying to you before that for as long as I can remember, I mean, particularly from my 20s onwards, I think it was that when I was beginning to get opportunities and things, and it felt so much bigger than me, that the picture that has always been in my mind is me standing on God's hand, so that I was never alone. And actually, I was never conscious I was conscious of people. I'd see people there and everything, but that wasn't the thing that grounded me, or what I'd said wasn't grounding me, but the fact that I was standing on his hand. And I think sometimes I am lying on his hand and I'm in the fetal position on his hand. The key thing is the hand has always been there and was always there. So I think that's the thing I've learned about God. I think the thing I've learned about me is you know what? Two things. And in some ways they're extremely different. One is in some ways that I am still, I'm just still a human, vulnerable kid who has lost a lot, who has questions, who has big ideas, who has big resentments, and who is just bleh. Do you know what I mean? This is it. This is it. I'm all of these things all at once. Do you know what I mean? This is it. And I think and this was probably some of the specific things of the rock bottoms of leadership, was that if I'd have trusted my gut, I probably wouldn't have been in the mess. Do you know what I mean? I hate that reality that sometimes I have ceded the things I knew because I didn't believe in what God had given me or what God was saying. And I had the flicker of hold on a second, and I just dismissed it. It's like, oh, Joe, what do you know? And later on, like, what you knew was that the Lord was warning you. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that would be for me. And then in terms of community, it's not an option. It's not an optional extra. It is an essential part of our leadership and our life. It is like air we breathe. It is none of this. I was saying this to the students a week ago. I said, one of the biggest fallacies you will hear is that the best thing you can do is just be dependent on God on his own. And I said, that's not how he designed you. That's not how he's designed. He, in his very nature, his relationship, he wept in front of his friends, and his friends turned out to be rubbish in that moment. Do you know what I mean? He was angry in front of his friends. He did all of these things and said, do not believe the lie that you're at your holiest when it's just you and God. No, that's you isolated. You've isolated. And so I think that you can be completely dependent on God and be in community. They are not one or the other. And so I think community is just like, oh my gosh, because I can't do this life alone. I can't lead alone. I just can't.
Wow.
It's just not. And now I don't want to.
Jo Saxton, every time you come, I feel like I could float on out of here. Honestly, it's always the best time with you. I'm so thankful for what you are. You are a deep well, girl. You are a deep well. And no matter where I dig or where I throw that shovel, you always come up with these incredible gems. Guys, can I encourage you to get to know Jo Saxton, josaxton.com, find her on the platforms, buy her books, read her books, follow her, whatever she is offering, consume it. It's good fruit. It's life-giving wisdom, prayer-soaked stuff. It's knowledgeable. It's high level information. And I'm so thankful for you. And as we close, I always do this with all my guests. It's just a little bit of a surprise. It's not a question, but it's more of a finish the sentence. So kind of placed against that backdrop of our conversation of leadership and burnout. Jo, what is it time for? What is it time for?
You know, the weirdest thing, Cheryl, and I'm sorry this is more than the sentence, is as you had a word for me earlier, the phrase I heard was, it's time. It's time. And I was like, for what? And I felt like the Lord was like, it's time for these leaders to do it, to dream again, to rise again, to get up again, it's time. The reason why you're doing what you do, the reason why we, with Women Speak Collect, all of it, the reason why is because now it's not like what you're gonna be or gonna do. It's now the time. It's time. It's time to lead, friends.
And I'm going to flip it on you as we close.
Mm-hmm.
Jo, what is it not time for?
Hiding. Mm-hmm.
We're going to call the choir to come at this time as we collect the offering and close with all to Jesus, I surrender. Oh my goodness. We have been taken to church and back. Let me tell you, Jo Saxton, I am so thankful for you. Thank you for being on the path with us. Please, please come back.
Oh gosh, thank you for having me. It's always an honor and always a lot of fun. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard. Please like, download, and subscribe. This has been an Exousia Media production.